Ottobah Cugoano, also known as John Stuart, c. 1757 after 1791, was an African abolitionist and natural rights philosopher from Ghana who was active in England in the latter half of the 18th century. Captured in present-day Ghana and sold into slavery at the age of 13. He was shipped to Grenada in the Lesser Antilles, where he worked on a plantation. In 1772 he was purchased by an English merchant who took him to England, where he was taught to read and write, and was freed following the ruling in the Somerset case. 1772. Later working for artists Richard and Maria Cosway, he became acquainted with British political and cultural figures. He joined the Sons of Africa, African abolitionists in England. Early life. He was born Kwabena Ottobah Cugoano in 1757 near Ajumaku, in modern-day Ghana. He was a Fante. His family was friends with the local chief. At the age of 13, Cugoano was sold into slavery and transported to Grenada to work on an island plantation. He worked in the Lesser Antilles until he was purchased in 1772 by an English merchant, who took him to England. That year, the merchant had Cugoano baptized as John Stuart. He was given his freedom in England following the decision in the Somerset case. 1772. Which ruled there was no basis for slavery in English common law. Abolitionist. In 1784, Stuart was employed as a servant by the artist Richard Cosway and his wife, Maria. Through the Cosways, he came to the attention of leading British political and cultural figures of the time, including the poet William Blake and the Prince of Wales. Together with Ottobah Cugoano and other educated Africans living in Britain, Stuart became active in the Sons of Africa, an abolitionist group whose members wrote frequently to the newspapers of the day, condemning the practice of slavery. In 1786 he played a key role in the case of Henry D. Mayne, a kidnapped black man who was to be shipped back to the West Indies. Cugoano contacted Granville Sharp, a well-known abolitionist, who was able to have D. Mayne removed from the ship before it sailed. In 1787, possibly with the help of his friend Ottobah Cugoano, Cugoano published an attack on slavery entitled Thoughts and Sentiments on the Evil and Wicked Traffic of the Slavery and Commerce of the Human Species. 1787. By now a devout Christian, he wrote work informed by that religion. His writing called for the abolition of slavery and immediate emancipation of all slaves. It argues that the slave's duty is to escape from slavery, and that force should be used to prevent further enslavement. The narrative was sent to King George III, the Prince of Wales, and to Edmund Burke, a leading politician. George III, along with much of the royal family, remained opposed to abolition of the slave trade. 4 years later, in 1791, Cugoano published a shorter version of his book, addressed to the Sons of Africa. In it, he expressed qualified support for the failed British efforts to establish a colony in Sierra Leone for London's poor blacks, mostly freed African American slaves who had been relocated to London after the American Revolutionary War. Other early settlers were black loyalists, also former American slaves, from Nova Scotia, who chose to move to Sierra Leone. Cugoano called for the establishment of schools in Britain, especially for African students. Nothing is known of Cugoano after the release of his book, Thoughts and Sentiments on the Evil and Wicked Traffic of the Slavery. Narrative of the Enslavement of Ottobah Cugoano, a native of Africa. London. Printed for the author and sold by Hatchett & Co. 1825. Online text at Documenting the American South. University of North Carolina. Resources for the study of Cugoano. Bryce Carey website. Adam Hochschild, The Unsung Heroes of Abolition. History. BBC. Page includes engraving by Richard Cosway, possibly of Cugoano. Selected passages from Narrative of the Enslavement of a Native of Africa. Spartacus Educational.